My name is Bridget Williams, and at 67 years old, I never expected to be a widow with $53 million in my bank account. My only son, Jackson, recently married a woman named Amelia after dating for just 6 months. Something in my gut told me to keep quiet about the fortune my late husband Harold left me. Thank goodness I listened to that instinct, because 5 days after their wedding, Amelia showed up at my doorstep with a man in an expensive charcoal suit. The rapid knock echoed through my modest 4-bedroom home, the same one Harold and I had purchased when Jackson was born. I opened the door to find my new daughter-in-law standing there, designer handbag hanging from her forearm, diamonds glittering at her throat. The warmth that had graced her face at the wedding had vanished, replaced by a cool determination. "Bridget," she said, my first name sounding foreign on her lips after weeks of calling me Mom, with practiced sweetness. "This is Albert Wright, our financial advisor. We'd like to discuss our share of the Williams hardware money. The $53 million the empire Harold built from nothing." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral as I invited them in, grateful that some inner wisdom had cautioned me to keep Harold's legacy private. "Please have a seat." I gestured toward the living room sofa. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable and well-maintained, like everything else we owned. Albert Wright's eyes scanned the room clearly, assessing its modest value, his gaze lingering on the family photos rather than the furnishings. I recognized that calculating look. I'd seen it in enough business meetings with Harold over the years. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, not because I wanted to serve them, but because my mother had taught me that politeness is armor. "We won't be staying long," Amelia replied, her voice clipped. "We simply need to discuss what Jackson is entitled to from his father's estate. Before I explain what happened next, let me share how Harold and I built everything from nothing, because that's the only way to understand the weight of what was at stake when Amelia walked through my door. Harold and I were married for 42 beautiful years before cancer took him from me 18 months ago. Most people in our town knew him as the friendly owner of Williams Hardware, but few knew the empire he had quietly built over 4 decades. The first time I met Harold, I was a 25-year-old kindergarten teacher with student loans and a car that broke down more often than it ran. I walked into Gartner's Hardware on the edge of town, determined to fix my apartment sink myself rather than pay a plumber I couldn't afford. Harold was behind the counter, tall, lean, with capable hands and a crooked smile that made something flutter in my chest, despite my determination to focus on the task at hand. "Most women your age would just call a plumber." He said, that smile making his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Most women my age don't have student loans and a broken-down car to pay for," I replied, my chin lifting slightly. Instead of being offended, Harold's smile widened. He not only sold me the right parts at a discount, but insisted on drawing detailed diagrams showing me how to fix the sink myself. When I returned a week later for supplies to fix a leaking shower head, he remembered my name. By the 3rd visit, a squeaky door this time, he asked me to dinner. Over pasta at the only Italian restaurant in town, Harold told me about dropping out of college when his father got sick, taking a job at Gartner's to help support his family. He was only 22 at the time, with nothing but determination and a strong work ethic. "My dad worked in the factory for 30 years, he explained, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Never complained, never missed a day. When the cancer took hold, the company gave him a watch and wished him luck." His jaw tightened momentarily. I promised myself I'd build something different, something that would last. We were married 8 months later in a simple ceremony at my parents' church. Instead of a honeymoon, we put every penny we had saved toward a down payment on a tiny, struggling hardware store on the edge of town, Gartner's, where Harold had worked for years. The owner was retiring with no children interested in taking over. "This will be the first of many," Harold told me the day we got the keys, his eyes bright with a vision I could barely glimpse. But I believed in him completely. The early years were lean. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above the store, working 7 days a week. I continued teaching kindergarten during the day and helped with the books at night. Harold knew every customer by name, remembered their projects, and often stayed late to help someone figure out a tricky plumbing issue or electrical problem. Word spread. Business grew. 5 years into our marriage, we had saved enough for a down payment on our house, the same 4-bedroom home where I still live today. We chose it not for its prestige, but for its good bones, and the large backyard where we imagined children playing. That same year, we opened our second Williams Hardware location in a neighboring town. The day we signed the lease, I told Harold I was pregnant with Jackson. Harold lifted me off my feet in that empty storefront, spinning me around as sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. "Everything is coming together," he whispered against my hair. Our family, our future. Jackson was born in the spring, a serious baby with Harold's thoughtful eyes and my stubborn chin. From the moment Harold held him, I saw a new kind of determination take root in my husband. The drive to build something wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about creating a legacy for our son. When Jackson was 3, Harold expanded to a third location. By the time Jackson started kindergarten, we had 5 stores across the state. Harold had a natural gift for business, knowing when to take risks and when to be cautious, understanding that quality and service mattered more than quick profits. I watched in amazement as my quiet, hard-working husband transformed into a respected business leader in our community. Through it all, we lived modestly in the same 4-bedroom house. We drove sensible cars, took 1 vacation a year, and reinvested most of the profits back into the business. Money should work for you, not the other way around. Harold always said, gently refusing when I occasionally suggested a larger home or more extravagant holidays. Flash your cash and you attract the wrong kind of people. Those words would come back to me many times after he was gone. By the time Jackson was in middle school, Williams Hardware had grown to 12 stores across 3 states. Harold had developed a reputation for fair pricing, quality products, and exceptional customer service. He knew the names of most of his employees and insisted on profit sharing and generous benefits unusual for a retail operation of our size. "They're building this with us," he'd tell me when reviewing the quarterly numbers. "They deserve to share in the success." As for Jackson, Harold started setting aside money for his future from the day he was born. But Harold was adamant that our son grow up understanding the value of hard work, never knowing the true extent of our wealth. Summer vacations for Jackson meant working in the stockroom at various store locations, learning the business from the ground up. I remember watching them one summer evening when Jackson was 16, closing up the original store together. Harold was showing him how to balance the register, his large hand resting patiently on Jackson's shoulder as our son carefully counted out the day's earnings. They didn't know I was there picking them up after my book club meeting. The sight of them so alike in profile, so focused on doing even this small task properly, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Jackson excelled in school, particularly in English and literature. While Harold had secretly hoped their summer work sessions might spark an interest in the family business he never pushed. When Jackson announced his intention to study English literature in college instead of business administration, I saw a flicker of disappointment cross Harold's face before he broke into a wide smile. "The world needs storytellers as much as it needs hardware stores," he said, pulling our son into a hug. "I'm proud of you." Jackson chose academia instead of business, eventually earning his PhD and becoming a professor of literature at Westlake University. Harold couldn't have been prouder, even though our son had no interest in taking over the family business. "He's doing what he loves," Harold told me one night as we sat on our back porch watching fireflies blink in the growing darkness. "That's worth more than any amount of money I could leave him." By then, Williams Hardware had expanded to 23 stores across the Midwest. Harold had assembled a capable management team, many of whom had been with us since those early days. The business largely ran itself, though Harold still visited every location at least twice a year, shaking hands and learning names. 3 years before his diagnosis, Harold received an unexpected offer from a national chain to buy Williams Hardware. He was 62 at the time, and though he'd never spoken of retirement, I'd noticed him moving a little slower, wincing occasionally when his back bothered him after decades of lifting and demonstrating home repair techniques. The offer was substantial, $50 million. A figure that seemed almost unreal to me despite knowing the value of what we'd built. Harold spent weeks consulting with financial advisors, lawyers, and his management team. He worried about his employees insisting on guarantees that they would be retained with their current benefits and seniority. He fretted about customer service declining under corporate ownership. But eventually he accepted their offer, recognizing it as the right decision for our future. "I want to ensure you're taken care of, Bridge," he told me one night. "And I want time to travel with you to see Jackson settle into his career, maybe even meet our grandchildren someday." We celebrated the sale privately, just the 2 of us, with a bottle of champagne on our back porch. There were no extravagant purchases, no announcements to friends or extended family. Harold invested most of the money wisely, working with Thomas Harold, a financial advisor, with a conservative approach that matched Harold's own philosophy. Our lifestyle remained largely unchanged, perhaps a few more dinners out, an extra vacation to the Maine coast Harold had always wanted to see. When Harold was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer the following year, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. He fought bravely for 14 months, enduring treatments that ravaged his strong body but never diminished his spirit. I watched my husband of 4 decades shrink and fade, yet somehow his essential nature, his kindness, his quiet dignity remained intact until the very end. Jackson was magnificent during that time, flying home regularly from Westlake, sitting with his father for hours discussing books and ideas. I would find them in deep conversation, Harold's thin hand gesturing emphatically, despite his weakness. Jackson leaning forward to catch every word. They grew closer during those painful months than they had been since Jackson's childhood. Harold passed away peacefully in our home with Jackson and me by his side. His last coherent words to me were, "Take care of our boy, but make sure he stands on his own 2 feet." Even then, in his final moments, he was thinking about how to balance love with the independence that had defined his own life. After the funeral, I learned the full extent of what Harold had left me. Between the business sale investments, life insurance, and our properties, I inherited $53 million. Jackson received a trust fund of $1 million that would mature when he turned 35, still 3 years away. Harold had structured everything meticulously with his attorney, making sure I would be the sole decision-maker regarding the bulk of the estate. The grief was overwhelming in those first months. I wandered around our house, touching Harold's things, sleeping in his bathrobe, and watching old home videos until my eyes burned. Jackson was my rock during that time, coming over several times a week, calling daily and making sure I was eating properly. For the first year, I barely thought about the money. It sat in accounts managed by Thomas Harold while I learned how to be a person without my husband. Eventually, I started seeing friends again and even joined a widow's support group at the community center. I began volunteering at the elementary school where I'd once taught reading to children whose eager faces reminded me of Jackson at that age. Through it all, Jackson remained single. He had a few relationships over the years, but nothing serious. At 32, he seemed content with his books, his students, and his close circle of friends. I sometimes worried he might end up alone, but I kept those thoughts to myself. After all, Harold and I had raised him to make his own choices. Then 6 months ago, everything changed when Jackson met Amelia at a university fundraising gala. She was 29, strikingly beautiful, and worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative. The way Jackson described their meeting, it sounded like something from a romance novel. She was standing alone by the fountain in the courtyard, Mom. He told me, his eyes practically sparkling. She was wearing this blue dress, and when she turned around, I swear time stopped. Within 2 weeks, they were dating exclusively. Within a month, he was bringing her to Sunday dinner at my house. I still remember the sound of her high heels clicking on my hardwood floors as she walked in designer handbag on her arm and diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. "Your home is so charming," Amelia said, looking around my living room with what I now recognize was calculation rather than appreciation. "Jackson mentioned your husband ran some hardware stores. Was it a small, local chain?" There was something about the way she asked that made me pause. It seemed too direct, too interested in the business rather than the man who built it. But I brushed it off, attributing my wariness to being overprotective of both Jackson and Harold's memory. "Harold built it from the ground up," I replied simply. "It was his life's work." "And he sold it before he passed, right?" she pressed. "That must have been a nice retirement package for you both." Jackson quickly changed the subject, but that moment stuck with me. It was the first of many red flags I would notice about Amelia, though I tried to ignore them for Jackson's sake. He seemed happier than I'd seen him in years, talking animatedly about their shared interests and future plans. After dinner that night, as I washed dishes and Jackson helped dry them like we always did, Amelia excused herself to use the bathroom. She was gone for nearly 20 minutes. Later, I found my bedroom door slightly ajar, though I always keep it closed. Nothing seemed disturbed, but it felt like someone had been looking through my things. When Harold was alive, he often told me, "Trust your gut bridge. It knows things before your head catches up." That night, my gut was sending me warning signals about Amelia. But Jackson seemed so happy, so I kept my concerns to myself and remembered another piece of Harold's wisdom. Keep your cards close until you know who you're playing with. In the weeks that followed, Jackson brought Amelia to dinner regularly. Each time she arrived with expensive gifts, premium wines, I knew cost more than a professor's daily salary, gourmet chocolates, once even a cashmere scarf that must have cost hundreds. Each time her questions circled back to Harold's business, our financial situation, or Jackson's prospects at the university. "Surely they'll promote you to department chair soon," she said one evening. "With your publications and reputation, they must see your value." Jackson laughed self-deprecatingly. "I'm years away from that, Amelia. There are senior professors ahead of me in line." "But they're not a Williams," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your family name should count for something." The comment struck me as odd. The Williams name had weight in our community because of Harold's reputation for integrity and hard work, not because of wealth or social standing. It seemed Amelia misunderstood what our family valued. 4 months after they met, Jackson called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice trembling with excitement. "Mom, I asked Amelia to marry me. She said yes." My heart sank even as I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you both." "We want a short engagement," he continued, apparently not noticing my hesitation. "We're thinking 2 months from now, something small and intimate." 2 months seemed alarmingly fast, but I said nothing to dampen his joy. Instead, I invited them both to dinner that weekend to celebrate promising champagne and Harold's favorite pot roast recipe. At that celebratory dinner, Amelia arrived wearing an enormous diamond engagement ring that made me blink in surprise. Jackson was doing well as a tenured professor, but such an extravagant ring seemed beyond his means. When I asked about it privately while Amelia was taking a phone call on the porch, he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Amelia had very specific tastes, Mom. I took out a small loan to supplement my savings. It's fine, I can handle the payments." Alarm bells rang louder in my mind, but again I held my tongue. Jackson was an adult, and Harold had always respected his financial decisions even when he disagreed with them. I would do the same. As their wedding approached, Amelia's influence on Jackson became increasingly apparent. He traded his sensible sedan for a luxury car that seemed out of place in the faculty parking lot. He mentioned looking at houses in exclusive neighborhoods far from his modest faculty apartment. When I expressed mild surprise at these changes, he became defensive. "Dad left me a trust fund, Mom. It's time I started enjoying life a little." I didn't correct his misunderstanding about the size of his trust fund, which was substantial, but not unlimited. Nor did I mention that it wouldn't mature for another 3 years. Something held me back, that quiet inner voice that had served me well throughout my life. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jackson and Amelia came to dinner with unexpected news. What had been planned as a small ceremony had ballooned into an elaborate affair with 300 guests, most of whom Jackson had never met. "Amelia has connections in the pharmaceutical industry," he explained somewhat apologetically. "Important people who could be valuable contacts for the university." The wedding was scheduled at the Grand Meridian, our city's most exclusive hotel. The budget had tripled. Amelia had selected a designer gown that cost more than my car. Through it all, Jackson looked simultaneously excited and overwhelmed, like a man caught in a current too strong to resist. At the rehearsal dinner, I found myself seated at a table with several of Amelia's friends, women with perfect manicures and conversation limited to designer brands and exotic vacations. They spoke about Jackson as if he were a quaint curiosity. "A literature professor, how intellectual," one woman said with a smile that felt patronizing. "Does he write those academic books no one reads?" "Amelia said the Williams family sold some kind of store chain," another commented. "Hardware or housewares or something." "Was it a good exit?" I answered politely but vaguely, increasingly certain that I should keep Harold's financial arrangements private. Their interest seemed predatory rather than genuine. The wedding itself was a spectacle of excess that would have made Harold deeply uncomfortable. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a 10-piece orchestra, none of it reflecting Jackson's usually modest tastes. As I watched my son recite his vows, I noticed Amelia's eyes flicking to the expensive watch on his wrist, a wedding gift she had helped him select the previous week. At the reception, I was struck by how many of the guests were professionals in finance, real estate, and law. A silver-haired man approached me at the dessert table, introducing himself as Julian Pierce, a wealth management specialist. "Amelia speaks so highly of you," he said, handing me his business card. "If you ever want to discuss diversifying your portfolio, I specialize in helping widows maximize their estates." I thanked him politely while slipping the card into my purse with no intention of calling. How had Amelia described me to these people? What had she told them about our family finances? The questions multiplied in my mind as the evening progressed. After the wedding, Jackson and Amelia left for a 2-week honeymoon on the Amalfi Coast, another expense I suspected he could ill afford. I returned to my quiet home, poured a glass of Harold's favorite whiskey, and sat in his study, surrounded by photographs of our life together. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. The answer came to me clearly as if he were sitting across from me. Protect our son, but let him learn his own lessons. 4 days after the newlyweds returned from their honeymoon, Jackson called. His voice sounded strained as he asked if he could stop by alone to discuss something important. When he arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. Drawn face shadows under his eyes, the carefree happiness of the wedding day completely erased. "Mom," he began hesitantly after declining offers of coffee or food. "Amelia and I have been talking about our future. We think that it might be time for you to share some of Dad's estate with us." My heart constricted, but I kept my expression neutral. "What brought this on Jackson?" He shifted uncomfortably on the sofa where he'd sat countless times throughout his life. "We have plans, a house in Oakwood Hills, some investments Amelia's advisor suggested. The honeymoon was more expensive than we planned, and there are some credit card bills from the wedding." His voice trailed off, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "What does Amelia know about your father's estate?" I asked carefully. "Just what I've told her, that Dad built a successful business and left us well provided for." He paused. "I didn't give specifics because honestly I don't know them myself. You've always been private about the finances." I nodded slowly. "Your father wanted it that way. He believed money shouldn't define a person's worth or decisions." Jackson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But we're family, Mom. Don't you think it's time we discuss the details I'm going to inherit eventually anyway?" The word "eventually" hung in the air between us, carrying implications I didn't want to examine too closely. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, buying time to order my thoughts. "Your father set up a trust for you," I said finally. $1 million that becomes available when you turn 35. It was his way of ensuring you established yourself independently first." Jackson's eyes widened. $1 million? He seemed genuinely surprised. "But the business sale, I thought it would be much more." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen and his expression changed subtly. "Amelia," he murmured. "She's wondering how our conversation is going." That confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't about Jackson's curiosity. It was about Amelia's agenda. "Tell her we're having a lovely mother-son chat," I suggested mildly. "Financial details can wait for another day." Jackson nodded, but the tension around his mouth told me this wouldn't be the end of the discussion. After he left, I poured another small measure of Harold's whiskey and considered my options. The trust Harold had established was irrevocable. Jackson would receive his $1 million at 35 regardless of my actions. But the bulk of the estate, the $53 million that represented Harold's life's work, was in my control. The responsibility weighed heavily. That night I dreamed of Harold. We were in the original hardware store dust motes, dancing in sunbeams that streamed through the windows. He was showing a young Jackson how to use a level, those patient hands guiding our son's smaller ones. "It's not just about keeping things straight," Dream Harold was saying. "It's about building something that lasts." I woke with tears on my cheeks and clarity in my mind. Harold had built his legacy carefully, brick by solid brick. I wouldn't let it be dismantled by hasty decisions or outside influences. I would protect what he'd created while honoring his wish for Jackson to stand on his own. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock the following morning. Through the peephole, I saw Amelia standing on my porch, accompanied by a middle-aged man carrying a leather portfolio. The financial advisor Albert Wright, I would soon learn. My stomach tightened, but Harold's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "You've got this bridge. Stand your ground." I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my hair, and opened the door to face whatever came next. The fortune Harold had spent 40 years building, and the son we both loved, were worth fighting for. "Bridget," Amelia said with a tight smile, "we need to talk about Jackson's inheritance." And so began the battle for Harold's legacy. "Please come in." I stepped back from the doorway, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. Amelia swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume Albert Wright, following with the measured steps of someone accustomed to intimidating others with their presence. "Shall we sit in the kitchen?" I gestured toward the sunny space where Harold and I had shared thousands of cups of coffee. "I've just made a fresh pot." Albert cleared his throat as he settled his substantial frame onto one of my oak chairs. "Mrs. Williams, we won't take much of your time. We're here to discuss Jackson's rightful portion of the Williams hardware assets." I poured coffee into Harold's favorite mug's blue ceramic handmade by a local potter, buying myself precious seconds to think. Cream or sugar, Mr. Wright? Black is fine. His fingers drummed impatiently against his leather portfolio. As I was saying, Amelia and Jackson feel it's time to discuss a more equitable distribution of the family wealth. Amelia hadn't touched her coffee, her manicured fingers instead tracing the edge of the kitchen table. Bridget Jackson told us about the $1 million trust fund. While that's generous, we know the hardware chain sold for significantly more. The careful way she emphasized generous made it clear she found the amount anything but. I took a deliberate sip from my mug, Harold's voice echoing in my memory. The first one to speak in a negotiation loses. What Jackson may not have mentioned, Amelia continued into the silence, is that we've made some commitments based on our future financial security. A home in Oakwood Hills. Investment opportunities. Jackson deserves access to his inheritance now, not 3 years from now when he's 35. Albert nodded, flipping open his portfolio to reveal a document filled with numbers. We've prepared a proposal for an immediate distribution of $10 million. This would allow the newlyweds to establish themselves properly while still leaving you more than comfortable, Mrs. Williams. $10 million. Nearly 20% of Harold's life's work demanded by a woman who'd known my son for 6 months. I set my mug down carefully, the ceramic making a soft click against the wooden table. This is quite unexpected. I kept my voice neutral. I'll need to consult with my own financial advisors before responding to such a significant request. Amelia's smile tightened at the corners. Of course, but we'd appreciate a timely decision. The Oakwood Hills property won't remain available indefinitely. I understand. I'll discuss this with Thomas Harold next week. I rose from my chair, signaling the end of our meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a prior commitment this morning. After they left, I stood at my kitchen window watching Amelia's luxury sedan pull away from the curb. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the phone, but not from fear, from resolve. I wasn't calling Thomas Harold. Instead, I dialed Linda Hernandez, the sharp-minded attorney who had helped Harold structure his estate. Linda, it's Bridget Williams. I need your counsel on a delicate matter. How soon can we meet? The following morning, I sat in Linda's office surrounded by law books and framed diplomas. At 58, Linda had the confident demeanor of someone who'd navigated countless family disputes and emerged victorious. Her salt and pepper hair was cut in a practical bob, her dark eyes missing nothing as I explained the situation. So your daughter-in-law of 5 days arrived with a financial advisor requesting $10 million? Linda tapped her pen against her legal pad. Did they present any documentation or formal request? Just figures on a spreadsheet, projected expenses for a lifestyle well beyond what Jackson has ever shown interest in. Linda nodded thoughtfully. Harold structured things very clearly. The bulk of the estate is yours to manage as you see fit. Jackson's trust becomes available at 35 with no provisions for early distribution except in cases of medical emergency. Relief washed through me. So legally I don't need to give them anything. Correct, but family dynamics rarely follow legal boundaries. Linda set down her pen. Tell me about this Amelia. How long have they been together? 6 months total. The relationship moved incredibly fast. I described their courtship, the lavish wedding, and the subtle signs that had triggered my concern. With each detail, Linda's expression grew more serious. I'd like your permission to conduct a background check on Amelia, she said after I finished. Something about this situation feels calculated. I hesitated only briefly. Do it. I need to protect Jackson even if he doesn't realize he needs protection. While Linda began her investigation, I maintained a careful normalcy in my interactions with Jackson and Amelia. Sunday dinners continued, though the conversation now carried undercurrents of tension. Amelia made pointed references to friends' vacation homes and investment successes. Jackson seemed caught between his wife's ambitions and his own simpler values, occasionally throwing me questioning glances when Amelia mentioned their house hunt. 3 weeks after their initial visit, Amelia called to cancel our regular Sunday dinner. Jackson's caught up in end-of-term grading, she explained, her voice light. We'll see you next weekend. Something about her tone triggered my suspicion. After hanging up, I drove past Jackson's faculty apartment building. His car wasn't there, but Amelia's sleek sedan was parked outside. A small deception, but it deepened my unease. The following day, Linda called. Bridget, I have some information you should see. Can you come to my office this afternoon? 2 hours later, I stared at the documents spread across Linda's conference table. Amelia's history unfolded before me in credit reports, marriage certificates, and court filings. She had been married twice before, not the never found the right person story she'd told Jackson. Both marriages were to wealthy men at least 15 years her senior. Both ended in divorce within 3 years, with Amelia receiving substantial settlements. There's more. Linda slid another folder toward me. She's currently carrying significant debt designer clothes, luxury car lease credit cards maxed out. She was facing a collection action when she met Jackson. My stomach clenched. She saw him as a financial solution. It appears so. And there's one other thing. Linda hesitated. Amelia has been making inquiries about Harold's estate through various financial channels. She approached several wealth management firms claiming to represent the Williams family interests. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Amelia had been investigating us assessing Harold's worth even as she was dating Jackson. The calculated nature of her interest in my son made me physically ill. What do I do with this information if I show Jackson he might not believe me? Or worse, he might think I'm trying to sabotage his marriage out of some kind of spite. Linda's eyes softened with understanding. We proceed carefully. First, we secure your assets further. Then we find a way to help Jackson see the truth without forcing it on him. Over the next week, Linda helped me restructure some of my holdings to provide additional layers of protection. I established a new living trust with specific conditions governing any future distributions to Jackson or his spouse. I updated my will clarifying my intentions for Harold's legacy. Each document felt like a shield being raised not against my son, but against the influence trying to manipulate him. The hardest part was maintaining a facade of normalcy when I saw Jackson. He called midweek asking if he could stop by alone to pick up some books he'd left in his old room. When he arrived, the strain in his face was evident new lines around his eyes, a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before the wedding. Is everything okay, sweetheart? I kept my tone casual as I handed him a glass of iced tea. Jackson sighed, setting the glass down untouched. Amelia's disappointed about your response to our financial request. She says you don't trust her. It's not about trust, Jackson. It's about respecting your father's wishes and protecting what he built. I chose my words carefully. Harold structured things the way he did for specific reasons. But circumstances change, Mom. Dad couldn't have anticipated my marriage, my need for establishing a proper household. A note of frustration entered his voice. 10 million is just a fraction of the estate. A proper household doesn't require millions, Jackson. You never wanted that kind of lifestyle before. His eyes flashed with an unfamiliar defensiveness. Maybe I never thought it was possible before. Maybe Amelia has helped me see that I deserve more than a cramped faculty apartment and university committee meetings. The words stung because they weren't his. They were hers, planted and nurtured until he believed them. I resisted the urge to show him Linda's files to expose Amelia's past and present deceptions. The time wasn't right. He was too deeply entangled in her influence. Why don't we discuss this again in a few weeks? I suggested gently. Give me time to review things with my advisors. Jackson nodded reluctantly, gathering his books. At the door, he paused. I love you, Mom. I just want you to accept Amelia as part of our family. I love you too, I replied, the words catching slightly in my throat. More than anything. After he left, I called Linda. We need to accelerate our plan. Jackson is being pulled further into her narrative every day. 2 days later, Linda called with unexpected news. Bridget Amelia has contacted Albert Wright's law firm about contesting Harold's will. She's claiming that as Jackson's wife, she has rights to the family assets that are being unlawfully withheld. She can do that. Alarm shot through me. They've been married less than a month. She can try, but she won't succeed. Harold's estate planning was rock solid. Linda's voice held a note of professional admiration. However, this shows she's willing to take aggressive action. We need to prepare Jackson for what's coming. Before I could formulate a plan to approach Jackson, events took an unexpected turn. The following evening, my doorbell rang just after 9. When I opened the door, Jackson stood on the porch, his face ashen in the porch light, a small overnight bag at his feet. Can I stay here tonight? His voice cracked slightly. I need some space to think. I ushered him inside without question, settling him in his old bedroom with a cup of chamomile tea like I used to make when he had nightmares as a child. He sat on the edge of his bed, looking lost among his old academic trophies and college pennants. "Do you want to talk about it?" I perched beside him, careful not to push. Jackson stared into his tea. "Amelia's not who I thought she was." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "What happened?" "I found texts on her phone. She left it unlocked when she went to shower." Shame colored his admission. "I've never checked her messages before, but something told me to look." "What did you find?" I asked softly, though I suspected the answer. "Messages to her friend Caroline about me. About us." His hand tightened around the mug. "She called me her academic meal ticket. Said she was working on accessing the Williams millions. There were jokes about how easy I was to manipulate with sex and flattery. My son's humiliation was written in every line of his body. I wanted to hold him like when he was small to shield him from this pain, but I knew he needed to process this betrayal in his own way." "There's more," Jackson continued, his voice hardening. "She's been working with Albert Wright since before we got engaged. They had a plan to pressure you into an immediate distribution, then convince me to invest in schemes where Wright would get substantial commissions." "I'm so sorry, Jackson." I chose my words carefully. "When someone we love betrays us, it cuts deeper than anything. Did you know—" He looked up suddenly, his eyes searching mine. "Did you suspect what she was doing?" I couldn't lie to him. I had concerns. After they came asking for money, I asked Linda to look into Amelia's background. And she's been married twice before to wealthy older men. Both marriages ended in substantial divorce settlements. I kept my tone factual, not accusatory. She was deeply in debt when she met you. Jackson closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this confirmation of his worst fears. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me, or would you have seen it as your mother interfering in your happiness?" I covered his hand with mine. "Some truths we have to discover for ourselves." He nodded slowly, the anger in his expression giving way to grief. "I thought she loved me, for me, not for some imagined fortune or family name." "I know, sweetheart, I know." I took the cooling tea from his hands and set it aside. "What will you do now?" "I don't know yet. I need time to think, to figure out how to confront her." Exhaustion crept into his voice. "Can I stay here for a few days?" "This is your home, Jackson. Always." As he settled into sleep in his childhood bedroom, I sat in the living room surrounded by family photos, Jackson's graduation, Harold teaching him to fish our last Christmas together before Harold's diagnosis. The faces of the two men I loved most in the world looked back at me, one gone, one hurting deeply just down the hall. I texted Linda. Jackson knows. He found evidence of Amelia's deception himself. He's staying with me for now. Her response came quickly. "This changes our strategy. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss next steps." The following morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Jackson had always been an early riser. I found him at the kitchen table, laptop, open fingers, typing furiously. "I'm documenting everything," he explained without looking up. "Every suspicious question from Amelia, every unusual expense, every time she pushed me to ask you about money. It all makes sense now." "That's a good start." I pulled out a chair across from him. "But eventually you'll need legal counsel." Jackson's shoulders slumped. "I feel like such a fool, Mom. We've been married less than a month and I'm already considering annulment." "You're not a fool. You're someone who believed in love and trust. Those aren't weaknesses, they're strengths." I reached across the table to close his laptop gently. "But right now we need to protect you legally as well as emotionally. Will you come with me to see Linda today?" He nodded, resignation and resolve mingling in his expression. "Let me shower first." As Jackson headed upstairs, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. "Mrs. Williams, this is Amelia. I know Jackson is with you. Unless you want this situation to become very public and very messy, we should talk about a settlement. $15 million would resolve this quickly and quietly. Otherwise, I'm prepared to contest Harold's will and drag your family's finances through a very public court process. You have 24 hours to respond." The threat was explicit: pay her off or face public exposure and legal battles. I forwarded the message to Linda, immediately adding, "She's escalating. We're coming to your office this morning." 3 hours later, Jackson and I sat in Linda's conference room, surrounded by legal pads and coffee cups, as he recounted the evolution of his relationship with Amelia. Linda listened intently occasionally, making notes, her expression growing sterner with each new detail. "Based on what you've told me and the evidence we've gathered," Linda said when Jackson finished, "we have grounds for an annulment based on fraud. Amelia entered the marriage under false pretenses with the specific intent to access family assets." "What about her threat to contest the will?" I asked. "Empty posturing. Harold's estate planning is impeccable, and she has no standing to challenge it, especially given the short duration of the marriage." Linda turned to Jackson. "The more pressing concern is protecting you from further manipulation or potential financial liability." Jackson nodded, a new determination in his eyes. "What do we need to do?" "First, secure all your financial accounts and documents. Change passwords, freeze credit, remove her as an authorized user on any joint accounts." Linda's efficiency was reassuring. "Second, document everything as you've started doing. Third, do not engage with her directly. All communication should go through legal channels." "And the annulment?" Jackson asked quietly. "I'll prepare the paperwork today. Given the evidence, we should be able to fast-track the process." Linda's expression softened slightly. "Jackson, I know this is painful, but acting quickly is your best protection." As we left Linda's office, Jackson seemed simultaneously drained and resolute. "I need to get some things from the apartment while Amelia's at work." "I'll come with you," I offered immediately. "No, Mom. I need to do this myself." His jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Harold. "I need to face this on my own." I respected his decision, though watching him drive away triggered every maternal instinct to protect. Instead, I channeled my energy into practical preparations, setting up his old room for a longer stay, calling Thomas Harold to discuss financial safeguards, reviewing Linda's strategy for countering Amelia's demands. Jackson returned 3 hours later with several boxes and a grim expression. "She came home while I was packing." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She tried everything, crying, pleading innocence, claiming her texts were jokes taken out of context." His voice was flat, emotionless. "When that didn't work, she switched to threats. Said she'd ruin my reputation at the university, claim emotional abuse dragged the Williams name through the mud." "Did you record any of this?" The lawyer in me immediately thought of evidence. "Yes. Linda suggested I keep my phone recording in my pocket." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Amelia didn't realize she was giving us more ammunition with every threat." That evening, as we ate a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches, Jackson's phone began buzzing repeatedly with calls and texts from Amelia. After the 10th call, he turned it off completely. "Tomorrow I'll get a new number," he said, pushing the silent phone away like it was contaminated. "Linda said minimizing contact is crucial while the legal process is underway." I nodded, then hesitated before asking the question that had been on my mind. "Do you want to stay at the university? Or would a fresh start somewhere else be easier?" Jackson considered this, stirring his soup absently. "I've built my career at Westlake. My research, my students, my colleagues, that's my life. I won't let Amelia take that from me, too." His determination filled me with pride. Despite everything, he was Harold's son, resilient, principled, unwilling to be driven from what he had built with his own efforts. The next morning brought a new development. Linda called early, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Amelia has escalated. She showed up at my office unannounced, demanding to see Jackson's legal file. When my assistant refused, she became belligerent. Security had to escort her out." "Is this helpful for our case?" I asked, moving to my study where Jackson couldn't overhear. "Extremely. It demonstrates emotional instability and aggressive behavior." Linda paused. "But there's more. She's hired Albert Wright, not just as a financial advisor, but as her attorney. They filed a legal motion requesting an emergency hearing regarding the Williams family assets she claims are being unfairly withheld." "Can they do that?" "They can file whatever they want, but it won't stand up in court. However, it does signal they're taking an aggressive approach." Linda's voice hardened. "Bridget, I recommend we counterfile immediately with the annulment petition. We need to take control of the narrative." I agreed, and within hours, Linda had filed the necessary paperwork. The legal machinery was now in motion, transforming a personal betrayal into a matter of court records and judicial decisions. When I explained the developments to Jackson, he received the news with a strange calm. "So now we wait for the legal system to unravel what should have been the happiest commitment of my life." His words carried no self-pity, only a sad recognition of reality. I squeezed his shoulder gently. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we've made a mistake and take steps to correct it. Dad would have seen through her immediately, Jackson said quietly. He was always a better judge of character than I am. Don't be so sure. Your father made his share of mistakes in business and in judging people. I smiled at a distant memory. He once hired a store manager who seemed perfect on paper. 3 months later, we discovered the man had been systematically stealing inventory. Harold was devastated not just by the theft, but by his own failure to see the man's true nature. What did he do? He pressed charges, then completely revamped our hiring processes and inventory controls. I met my son's eyes directly. He didn't waste time blaming himself. He fixed the problem, then created safeguards for the future. Jackson nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. So we press forward with the annulment and learn from this. Exactly. The next week passed in a tense holding pattern. Jackson stayed with me, driving to campus for his classes and office hours, then returning to the safety of his childhood home. Amelia made no further attempts to contact either of us directly, but Linda reported increasing aggression in the legal filings from Albert Wright's office. They're requesting financial discovery of all Williams family assets, Linda explained during our weekly update call. It's a fishing expedition trying to identify vulnerabilities or hidden accounts. Will the judge grant it? I paced my kitchen phone pressed to my ear. Unlikely given the brevity of the marriage and the compelling evidence of fraud, but they're trying to create enough legal mess to force a settlement. I won't be extorted, I stated firmly, Harold's principle echoing in my mind. Never reward bad behavior. It only invites more. Good, because I've scheduled Jackson's deposition for tomorrow. His testimony about Amelia's statements and behavior will be crucial in establishing the fraud basis for annulment. I relayed this information to Jackson when he returned from campus that evening. He received the news with the same quiet resolve he'd shown throughout the ordeal. I'll be ready, he promised, setting aside the stack of student papers he'd been grading. I've been documenting everything, reviewing the timeline of her deceptions. Are you holding up okay? I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the new lines of strain around his mouth. I'm surviving. He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The hardest part is facing colleagues who were at the wedding. I can see the questions in their eyes, the awkward avoidance of Amelia's name. People will talk for a while, then something else will capture their attention, I reassured him. Gossip has a short shelf life. I hope so. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Harold that my heart ached. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, the red flags I ignored because I was so captivated by her. Love can be blinding, I said gently. But you saw the truth when it mattered most. That's what counts. The following day, Jackson left early for his deposition at Linda's office. I busied myself with volunteer work at the elementary school, reading to third graders whose innocent enthusiasm temporarily distracted me from our family crisis. When I returned home mid-afternoon, I was surprised to find Jackson's car already in the driveway. Inside, I found him at the kitchen table, his expression more animated than I'd seen in weeks. Mom, you won't believe what happened at the deposition. My heart raced with concern. What is it? Amelia showed up with Albert Wright and another attorney, some aggressive type from Chicago. They tried to intimidate Linda with legal jargon and procedural objections. A hint of the old Jackson sparkled in his eyes. But then Linda presented the evidence, the text messages, the financial inquiries Amelia had made about our family before we even got engaged, statements from 2 of Amelia's friends who agreed to testify about her plans. And Wright asked for a break, took Amelia into a conference room. When they came back 20 minutes later, her entire demeanor had changed. The fight was gone. Jackson shook his head in disbelief. They're withdrawing their opposition to the annulment. No contest, no financial claims, complete separation. Relief rushed through me so powerfully I had to grip the back of a chair for support. That's wonderful news. But why the sudden reversal? Linda thinks Wright recognized they had no viable legal position, especially after seeing our evidence. Continuing would only cost Amelia money she doesn't have, and potentially expose her to counterclaims for legal expenses. I sat down across from Jackson, processing this unexpected development. So it's over. Almost. There's paperwork to complete, a judge to approve the annulment, but Linda says it should be straightforward now. Jackson reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Thank you for standing firm, Mom, for not giving in to her demands even when I was pushing you to do it. My eyes misted unexpectedly. I was just protecting what your father built, not just the money, but the principles behind it. Jackson nodded, understanding filling his expression. I see that now. Dad wasn't just leaving us financial security, he was leaving us a legacy of values. As the legal process moved toward its conclusion, Jackson began rebuilding his life. He found a new apartment closer to campus, threw himself into his teaching and research, and gradually reclaimed his confidence. I watched with relief as the shadows lifted from his eyes, as genuine smiles returned to replace the strained expressions of recent months. 6 weeks after Jackson discovered Amelia's texts, the judge granted the annulment, legally erasing the marriage as if it had never occurred. The decision arrived via email from Linda, prompting an impromptu celebration dinner at my house. I cooked Harold's favorite pot roast, and Jackson brought a bottle of good red wine. To lessons learned, he raised his glass in a toast. And to new beginnings, I clinked my glass against his, grateful beyond words to see my son emerging stronger from this ordeal. Later that evening, as Jackson helped me with the dishes, an old family tradition neither of us had outgrown, he grew contemplative. You know what haunts me most about all this? Not the embarrassment or even the betrayal, but how close I came to compromising everything Dad built and stood for. But you didn't, I reminded him. When it mattered most, you chose integrity over expedience. Jackson dried a plate slowly, his movements deliberate. I want to understand Dad's financial planning better, Mom. Not because I'm eager for my inheritance, but because I want to honor his intentions. Would you be willing to walk me through it sometime? The request touched me deeply. I'd like that very much. How about we start next Sunday, a new tradition, financial discussions over dinner? He smiled, the genuine warmth reaching his eyes. Dad would approve. He would. I agreed, thinking of how proud Harold would be of our son's resilience. He absolutely would. That night, after Jackson had gone home to his new apartment, I sat in Harold's study, surrounded by photographs of our life together. We did it, Harold, I whispered to the empty room. We protected what you built. We protected our son. The only response was silence, but in that silence I felt an abiding peace. The storm had passed, and though there would undoubtedly be others in the future, we had weathered this one together, mother and son present and past, standing firm on the foundation Harold had built with such care. The day of the final confrontation arrived with an appropriate heaviness in the air, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising a cleansing storm. Linda had suggested meeting at my home rather than her office, believing the familiar setting might help keep emotions in check. Jackson had agreed, his voice steady when he called Amelia to arrange the meeting. My mother's house, 3 o'clock. Bring whatever legal representation you want. Linda arrived an hour early to prepare, setting her briefcase on the dining room table with practiced precision. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this face-to-face? We could handle everything through legal channels. I arranged a pitcher of ice water and glasses on a tray, my movements deliberate and calm. Some things need to be said in person. This isn't just about legal resolutions, it's about looking deception in the eye and refusing to be diminished by it. Mom's right. Jackson entered from the kitchen, his posture straighter than it had been in weeks. I need to face Amelia directly, for my own sake. Linda nodded, understanding the necessity of this confrontation beyond its legal implications. She spread several documents across the table, the annulment papers, evidence of Amelia's previous marriages, transcripts of text messages revealing her true intentions. Let's go over our strategy one more time, she suggested, glancing at her watch. They'll be here in 45 minutes. The doorbell rang at precisely 3 o'clock. I took a deep breath before opening the door, centering myself in the knowledge that we stood on solid ground legally, morally, and emotionally. Amelia stood on my porch, her usual confident posture slightly diminished. Behind her was not Albert Wright, but a younger attorney I didn't recognize, clutching a slim portfolio. Please come in. I stepped back, maintaining the politeness my mother had instilled in me decades ago. Amelia's perfume, too heavy, too expensive, filled the entryway as she passed. Jackson stood in the living room entrance, his face a careful mask. For a moment, something flickered in Amelia's eyes. Perhaps genuine regret, or merely calculation. She reached toward him, her voice dropping to the soft tone she'd used during their courtship. Darling, what's wrong? Your mother isn't giving you a hard time about our financial discussions, is she? Jackson stepped back from her touch, the movement deliberate and final. Let's sit down, Amelia. We need to talk. In my living room with Linda present as our attorney, we laid out everything: the texts on Jackson's phone, my account of her visit with Albert Wright, evidence of her searching through personal documents, the pattern of her previous marriages. At first, Amelia tried denial, her performance almost convincing in its indignation. "These are ridiculous accusations," she insisted, tears welling in her eyes right on cue. "I love Jackson. Yes, I was curious about family finances, but what wife wouldn't be? A wife who married for love wouldn't bring a financial advisor to demand $10 million 5 days after the wedding," I pointed out calmly, refusing to be swayed by her theatrical display. When denial failed, she attempted to drive a wedge between Jackson and me. "Your mother has always disliked me," she told him, reaching for his hand. "She's trying to control you through money. Can't you see that?" Jackson withdrew his hand with quiet dignity. "Stop lying, Amelia. I've seen the text to your friends. I know this marriage was a calculated financial move from the beginning." Her facade cracked, then anger replacing the tears that had dried up suspiciously quickly. "Fine," she snapped. "What was I supposed to do? Marry some struggling academic with no prospects? Your family is sitting on $53 million while living like middle-class nobodies. It's pathetic." "What's pathetic," Jackson replied with remarkable composure, "is thinking money equals happiness or success. My father built his business through hard work and integrity, values you clearly don't understand." Linda then outlined the path forward: immediate separation annulment proceedings based on fraud and a cease and desist regarding any claims against my estate. Amelia's expression grew increasingly furious as she realized her schemes were collapsing around her. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she gathered her designer purse, the young attorney behind her looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Both of you. I have rights as a spouse, and I'll make sure this costs you dearly." "The only thing that costs dearly here is the lesson I've learned," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "And it was worth every penny." After she stormed out, Jackson sat heavily on the couch, emotional exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I can't believe I was so blind." Love makes us vulnerable. I sat beside him, the weight of the confrontation settling between us. "There's no shame in having an open heart." Linda gathered her documents, tucking them neatly into her briefcase. "That actually went better than expected." Her mask slipped completely, revealing her true character and intentions. If she tries to contest the annulment now, the judge will see right through her. The weeks that followed were challenging but healing. With Linda's expert guidance, Jackson filed for an annulment on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. Amelia initially threatened a lengthy legal battle, hiring a more aggressive attorney from Chicago, who sent threatening letters filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate. But she backed down when presented with the overwhelming evidence of her calculated deception: the text messages to friends, testimony from former classmates about her stated intentions to marry into money, and documentation of her substantial personal debt at the time of the wedding. The marriage was annulled 6 weeks later, declared legally void, as if it had never happened. The judge's ruling was unambiguous, citing clear and convincing evidence of fraud in the inducement to marry. Jackson received the news with a mixture of relief and lingering sadness, not for the loss of Amelia, but for the dream of partnership she had falsely promised. The financial aftermath was relatively straightforward thanks to the brevity of the marriage and our quick actions. The wedding expenses had created substantial debt: the lavish ceremony at the Grand Meridian, the honeymoon on the Amalfi Coast, the designer clothes Amelia had insisted were necessary for their new social standing. Jackson took responsibility for all of it, insisting on paying it himself despite my offer to help. "I need to clean up my own mess," he said firmly when I tried to contribute to the credit card payments. Dad would have expected nothing less. I recognized Harold's principles in Jackson's determination to stand on his own feet, to face the consequences of his choices with dignity, rather than looking for easy solutions. The pride I felt watching my son navigate this painful chapter with integrity outweighed any lingering anger toward Amelia. Throughout this difficult period, I watched Jackson grieve not just the relationship, but the future he had imagined. The dream home in Oakwood Hills, the children he'd hoped for, the partnership of minds and hearts he'd thought he'd found. Yet within that grief, I also saw him reconnecting with the values Harold and I had raised him with: integrity, responsibility, and the understanding that true wealth lies in character, not bank accounts. 3 months after the annulment, Jackson and I established our new tradition of weekly financial discussions. Each Sunday evening after dinner and dishes, we would sit at the dining room table with spreadsheets, investment reports, and estate planning documents spread between us. I shared Harold's financial philosophy, explained his investment strategies, and outlined the charitable foundations he had established before his death. Dad was building something so much bigger than I realized, Jackson mused one evening, reviewing the documentation of scholarships Harold had quietly funded for first-generation college students. He never talked about any of this. He believed charity should be private, I explained, remembering Harold's discomfort with public recognition. He used to quote that verse about not letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Jackson smiled, a genuine expression that was becoming more frequent as the weeks passed. I want to continue that tradition, using this money to create opportunities for others. It was during one of these meetings that I formally established a new trust for Jackson, with specific conditions that reflected both protection and trust. The money will be available to you at 35 as your father planned, I explained, but with provisions that protect it from future claims, not because I don't trust your judgment, but because everyone deserves a second layer of security. Jackson nodded, understanding the wisdom in this approach. I've been thinking about what to do with it eventually, he said, tracing a pattern on the mahogany table that had hosted family dinners for 3 decades. Maybe a scholarship fund for first-generation college students in Dad's name. His words filled me with pride. This was Harold's son through and through, looking beyond personal benefit to see how resources could create ripples of positive change. Your father would love that idea. As summer turned to fall, I began to see glimpses of the old Jackson returning. His academic work had actually flourished in the aftermath of the Amelia disaster. The emotional turmoil had somehow deepened his understanding of literary conflicts and character motivations, enriching his analysis of classic texts. His students responded to this new dimension in his teaching, and the department chair noticed. A book contract followed, then a promotion to associate professor achievements earned entirely on his own merit. Jackson had also started volunteering at a financial literacy program for young adults at the community center, turning his painful experience into education that might help others avoid similar pitfalls. Each Saturday morning, he taught basics of budgeting, investing, and debt management to a room full of eager 20-somethings, many of whom were the first in their families to attend college. "Mom," he said one Sunday evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, "I want to thank you for protecting Dad's legacy the way you did. If I had told you about the full inheritance earlier, Amelia might have succeeded. Or someone else would have tried eventually." He finished for me, the understanding in his eyes showing how much he'd grown. "I understand now why you and Dad kept so much private. Money doesn't just change how others see you. It can change how you see yourself if you're not careful." I reached over to squeeze his hand, grateful for this moment of perfect understanding between us. Harold would have treasured this conversation, his son fully grasping the philosophy that had guided our family through decades of building and preserving, not just wealth, but values. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I watched with quiet joy as Jackson began dating again, this time with a children's librarian named Kate, whom he'd met through his volunteer work. She drove a 15-year-old car, packed homemade lunches, and spent her free time organizing literacy programs in underserved neighborhoods. Their relationship progressed slowly, built on shared interests and values rather than whirlwind romance. When he brought her to dinner for the first time, I observed her closely, still protective after the Amelia experience. Kate wore a simple dress that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than status, asked thoughtful questions, and spent more time inquiring about Harold's life stories than his business success. She helped with the dishes without being asked and showed genuine interest in the family photos lining my hallway. "She doesn't know about the inheritance," Jackson told me after that dinner, "and I'm not going to tell her until I'm absolutely certain she loves me for me." His caution was understandable, but somehow I knew he wouldn't need to guard his heart forever with Kate. The way she looked at him when he was talking about his students with genuine interest rather than calculated patience told me everything I needed to know about her character. For me, my journey through this experience taught me lessons I never expected to learn in my 60s. I discovered that protecting family wealth isn't just about legal documents and financial structures, but about nurturing the values that created that wealth in the first place. I learned that secrets can sometimes be necessary boundaries rather than harmful barriers, and that silence can be a form of wisdom rather than withdrawal. Most importantly, I realized that Harold's financial wisdom had been a form of love and protection that continued even after he was gone. The $53 million that Amelia had coveted remained largely intact, growing steadily under Thomas Harold's management. But its true value wasn't in numbered accounts or investment portfolios. Its value lay in the education fund we established for low-income students and the small business loans we provided to entrepreneurs with dreams like Harold's, and in the security it represented for future generations of our family who would hopefully understand that money is a tool, not an identity. 6 months after Jackson introduced me to Kate, they were still dating, their relationship deepening naturally without the artificial acceleration that had characterized his time with Amelia. I invited them both for Sunday dinner, cooking Harold's favorite pot roast and apple pie. After the meal, as Kate helped me clear the table, she mentioned a literacy program she was developing for her library. It's for adults who never learn to read, or who read below a functional level. She explained her enthusiasm, evident in every word. So many doors close when you can't read well: job applications, rental agreements, medical forms. I've secured some grant funding, but it's not enough for the comprehensive program I've envisioned. I listened thoughtfully, struck by her passion for helping others. Tell me more about your vision for the program. I encouraged, sensing an opportunity to extend Harold's legacy in a new direction. Over coffee and pie, Kate outlined her plans in detail. Literacy coaches, specialized materials, childcare for participants, even transportation assistance for those who needed it. Jackson watched her with undisguised admiration, occasionally adding suggestions or questions that helped clarify her thoughts. As they prepared to leave that evening, I made a decision. Kate, I'd like to make a donation to your literacy program. Would you send me the details of where to direct the funds? Her face lit up with surprise and gratitude. That's incredibly generous, Mrs. Williams. Every contribution helps, no matter the size. Bridget, please, I corrected gently. And I was thinking something in the range of $50,000. Kate's mouth opened slightly in shock. Jackson's eyes met mine across the room, a question in them that I answered with a slight nod. He understood immediately this was not just about funding a worthy cause, but about my recognition of Kate's character and my growing trust in their relationship. I don't know what to say, Kate stammered, genuine emotion making her voice unsteady. That would fund our entire first year of operation with enough left over to develop all the materials we need. Then consider it done. I smiled, seeing in her stunned gratitude none of the calculation that had characterized Amelia's interest in our family's resources. Harold always believed in supporting education. This would honor his memory. Later, after Kate had gone home, Jackson lingered in my kitchen. Thank you for that, Mom. Not just for supporting Kate's program, but for showing her that kind of trust. She earned it, I replied simply. She reminds me a little of Harold, you know. That same quiet determination to help others, to build something meaningful without seeking recognition. Jackson nodded, understanding, lighting his eyes. I think that's why I love her. She values what matters. 3 months later, Jackson came to our Sunday financial discussion with nervous energy radiating from him. Before we even opened the investment reports, he placed a small velvet box on the table between us. I'm going to ask Kate to marry me, he announced, opening the box to reveal a modest diamond ring with a vintage setting. It was her grandmother's. Kate's mother offered it when I asked for her blessing. My heart swelled with joy and a touch of maternal concern. Are you sure, sweetheart? After everything with Amelia? I've never been more sure of anything. Jackson's certainty radiated from him. Kate loves me for exactly who I am. She has no idea about the trust fund or Dad's estate, and she doesn't care about those things. We've talked about building a life based on the work we love and the difference we can make together. I studied my son's face, seeing in it a contentment that had been absent even during the height of his infatuation with Amelia. This was deeper, more grounded in reality and shared values rather than fantasy and external validation. Then I couldn't be happier for you both. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. When are you going to ask her? This weekend. We're going hiking at Redwood Park. It's where we had our 3rd date. Nothing fancy or public, just the 2 of us under the trees she loves so much. His planning revealed how well he knew Kate's preferences for simplicity and natural beauty. She'll say yes, I said with certainty born of watching them together over the past 9 months. And this time it will be for all the right reasons. 2 days later, my phone rang just after sunset. Jackson's voice came through, filled with joy. She said, yes, Mom. She actually cried when I told her I wanted to build a life with her, based on the things that really matter, not possessions or status, but making a difference together. A weight I hadn't fully acknowledged lifted from my heart. My son had found someone worthy of his love, someone who saw his true value. Harold would have approved wholeheartedly. The engagement period was everything the previous one hadn't been: thoughtful, unhurried, focused on building a shared life rather than planning a lavish event. Kate and Jackson opted for a small ceremony in the botanical garden where Kate's literacy program had hosted its first graduation ceremony. The guest list included only close family and friends, with a special section reserved for Kate's adult literacy students who wanted to celebrate their teacher's happiness. 2 weeks before the wedding, during our now established Sunday financial discussion, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. "Jackson, I think it's time to tell Kate about the full extent of your inheritance." Surprise flickered across his face. "Are you sure I've been thinking I should wait until after we're married so she never questions my motives?" "Kate has proven herself in ways Amelia never could," I replied gently. "Keeping this secret now feels like a lack of trust rather than a protection. A marriage should start with transparency about something this significant." Jackson considered my words carefully. "You're right. It's not fair to begin our life together with such a major secret. I'll talk to her this week." 3 days later, they came to dinner together. Kate's expression as she greeted me held a new awareness, but none of the calculation I had feared might emerge even in the most genuine person when confronted with unexpected wealth. As we settled in the living room before dinner, Kate took my hand. "Jackson told me everything about the inheritance, the trust funds, what happened with Amelia. I want you to know that none of it changes how I feel about him or about you, Bridget. If anything, I'm more in awe of how you've both handled such wealth with such humility and purpose." The sincerity in her eyes brought unexpected tears to mine. "Thank you for being the kind of person who sees value in character rather than bank accounts. My parents raised me to believe that what you do matters more than what you have." Kate smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way Amelia's never had. "That's why Jackson's volunteer work was what first attracted me to him, not his position at the university or his family name." Over dinner, we discussed their plans for the future. A modest home near both the university and Kate's library, continued involvement in their respective educational programs, and a shared commitment to living simply while giving generously. "We've been talking about establishing a literacy foundation," Jackson explained, his hand finding Kate's naturally across the table. "Something that could expand Kate's program to other communities, maybe even nationally someday." "That sounds like a wonderful use of some of the inheritance," I nodded approvingly. Harold would have loved seeing his hard work translate into educational opportunities. As the evening progressed, I observed the easy partnership between them, the way they built on each other's ideas, respected differences of opinion, and shared core values, despite coming from different backgrounds. This was what Harold and I had hoped Jackson would find, not just a spouse, but a true partner in building a meaningful life. The wedding was everything a celebration of love should be: joyful, intimate, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. Kate wore a simple gown that suited her perfectly, carrying wildflowers gathered from the botanical garden that morning. Jackson's face as she walked toward him held the kind of genuine awe that can't be manufactured or performed. I sat in the front row, Harold's presence keenly felt in his absence. The gold locket around my neck held his picture, a small way of including him in this moment he would have treasured. As Jackson and Kate exchanged vows, they had written themselves promises of partnership, respect, and building a life of purpose together. I felt Harold's wisdom vindicated. His careful planning, his emphasis on values over possessions, his desire for Jackson to find his own path, all had led to this moment of authentic happiness. At the reception, a small gathering in the garden's glass-walled pavilion, Jackson pulled me onto the dance floor for the mother-son dance. "I wish Dad could see this," he said softly as we moved to the gentle music. "He sees," I replied with certainty. "Everything he hoped for you is coming true, not because of the money he left, but because of the values he instilled." Later, as Kate and Jackson prepared to leave for their modest honeymoon at a lakeside cabin, Kate hugged me warmly. "Thank you for raising such a good man," she whispered. "And thank you for welcoming me into your family so completely." "You're exactly who we hoped Jackson would find someday," I told her truthfully. "Someone who understands that wealth isn't measured in dollars." In the months that followed, I watched with quiet joy as Jackson and Kate built their life together. They purchased a charming craftsman home halfway between the university and the library, notable not for its size or luxury, but for its welcoming atmosphere and the little free library Kate installed by the sidewalk. The Williams Literacy Foundation became a reality, funded initially with a portion of Jackson's trust when he turned 35. Its mission to provide literacy education to underserved adults across the Midwest embodied Harold's belief in creating opportunity through education and hard work. Kate served as its executive director, bringing her expertise and passion to an organization that quickly gained recognition for its innovative approaches and measurable results. Jackson's academic career continued to flourish, his research and teaching enriched by his life experiences and the grounding influence of Kate's practical wisdom. When he was named department chair at 37, the achievement came from his own merit rather than family connections or financial leverage. As for me, my journey through this experience taught me that protecting Harold's legacy wasn't just about safeguarding his financial assets, but about preserving and passing on the principles that had guided his life. The $53 million that had once been the target of Amelia's schemes became a force for positive change, funding scholarships, supporting small businesses with interest-free loans, establishing the Literacy Foundation, and providing security for future generations of our family. But the true legacy wasn't measured in dollars. It was evident in Jackson's integrity when faced with difficult choices and Kate's dedication to serving others, in the values that would shape their children's understanding of wealth and responsibility. 5 years after that confrontation in my living room where Amelia's mask had finally fallen away completely, I sat on the porch of Jackson and Kate's home, watching their 3-year-old daughter Emma arrange blocks with the same focused concentration Harold had applied to building his business. "She has Harold's eyes," Kate remarked, settling beside me with cups of tea. "And his determination. And his heart," I added, watching Emma carefully share her blocks with the neighbor's child who had wandered over. "That's the most important inheritance of all." Jackson joined us, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You know what I think about sometimes? How different our lives would be if you had given in to Amelia's demands that day. If you had handed over the $10 million to keep the peace." "Some peace isn't worth the price," I replied. The wisdom of my 72 years crystallized in that simple truth. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stand firm when it would be easier to give in. Kate nodded thoughtfully. "Emma asked me yesterday what it means to be rich. I told her it means having enough of what matters, love, purpose, and the ability to help others. Everything else is just details." I smiled, hearing echoes of Harold's philosophy in her words. In the end, the fortune he left behind did exactly what he intended. It provided security without replacing the need for character, work ethic, and personal responsibility. By staying silent about that inheritance when my son got married the first time, I had protected not just the money, but the values it represented. The true measure of wealth, I realized as I watched Emma playing in the dappled sunlight, isn't found in bank accounts or investment portfolios. It's found in the legacy of values that shape generations to come, in teaching a child to share and standing firm for what's right, even when it's difficult, and recognizing that what we build matters less than why we build it. Harold would have understood perfectly.